The dust followed me up the drive, a plume of ochre chasing the tires of my beat-up truck. It was the kind of dust that coated everything, a fine silt that promised to work its way into the threads of my jeans and the creases of my skin. The ranch looked tired. The main house sagged a little to the left, like a person sighing after a long day. The fences were a patchwork of weathered gray wood and gleaming new wire, a testament to constant, losing battles against time and entropy. Everything baked under a sky so wide and blue it felt like a weight. I was here to fix a tractor, a simple transaction of labor for money, a way to keep my own life from sliding completely off its foundations. My business had failed, my relationship had ended, and my hands, which only felt right when they were holding a wrench, had been idle for too long. This job was a lifeline, a straightforward mechanical problem in a world that had become hopelessly complex. The woman who met me on the porch didn't match the weary landscape. She was tall, with shoulders that spoke of hauling hay bales and wrestling with livestock. Her name was Avery, she'd said on the phone, her voice a low hum like the engine I was here to repair. Up close, she was even more imposing. Her skin was the color of rich, dark soil, and her eyes held the kind of stillness you see in animals that have learned to wait. She wore worn denim, a faded plaid shirt, and a leather belt with a silver buckle that had lost its shine. She didn't smile. She just nodded, her gaze sweeping over my truck, then me, as if measuring my competence in a single, silent appraisal. "You're Lena," she stated, not asked. I nodded back, my own voice feeling thin in the vast quiet. "The John Deere is in the barn," she turned without waiting for a reply, and I followed the straight, unyielding line of her back, feeling like a supplicant approaching a queen. The barn smelled of hay, dust, and the metallic tang of old machinery. And there it was, a hulking green beast of a tractor, silent and defeated. It was an old model, the kind built to last forever, which only makes it hurt more when they finally give out. It looked like a fallen giant. I spent the first hour in silence, just me and the machine. I ran my hands over the cold engine block, tracing the lines of grease and rust like a blind woman reading a story of neglect. The battery was dead, that was obvious, but it was more than that. The fuel line was cracked, the filters were clogged with a decade of debris, and a fine web of corrosion had spread through the wiring like a disease. This wasn't a simple fix. This was a resurrection. I laid out my tools on a canvas tarp, the clean, metallic clicks echoing in the cavernous space. Avery stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the blinding afternoon sun, watching me. I could feel her eyes on my back, a pressure that was neither friendly nor hostile, just there. Finally, I stood up, wiping my greasy hands on a rag. "It's bad," I said, my voice hoarse. "The alternator is shot, you've got fuel system contamination, and the wiring harness is a rat's nest. It's going to take a few days, at least." I expected her to argue, to haggle, to express frustration. Instead, she just pushed off from the door frame and walked toward me, her boots scuffing softly in the dirt. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze leaving me and settling on the dead machine. "Everything is," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of the whole damn sky. "All right," I said, trying to bring us back to the solid ground of mechanics. "I'll start with pulling the engine block, get a better look at the damage." She looked at me then, her dark eyes pinning me in place. There was a flicker of something in them, not pain, exactly, but a deep, settled exhaustion that went far beyond physical work. "No," she said, the single word sharp and absolute. "Start with me." I must have stared at her, my mouth half open, the greasy rag dangling from my hand. My brain tried to parse the words, to fit them into the context of a tractor repair. Maybe it was a rancher's idiom I didn't understand. Maybe she meant I should start by getting paid, or getting the lay of the land from her perspective. But the way she said it, the way her eyes held mine, felt dangerously literal. It felt like a confession disguised as a command. She saw the confusion on my face and a bitter, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "This place," she said, gesturing vaguely with one hand to the barn, the silent house, the endless fences. "It's all connected. The tractor doesn't run because I haven't had the money or the time. I haven't had the time because the fences keep breaking. The fences break because I'm the only one here to fix them. It all comes back to the same place. She looked down at her own hands, calloused and scarred. That tractor is just a symptom. You can't fix a thing if you don't understand what's really broken. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken history. I was a mechanic, not a therapist. I fixed things with steel and oil, not words. But I was also a woman who knew what it felt like to be surrounded by the wreckage of her own life, to see every small failure as a symptom of a larger, more fundamental brokenness. I looked from her tired face to the dead machine and saw the parallel. Two stubborn, beautiful things that had been run too hard for too long. Okay, I heard myself say, the word coming out softer than I intended. Okay, Avery, where do we start? And so began the strangest repair job of my life. The work on the tractor was slow and methodical, a painstaking process of cleaning, stripping, and replacing. But the real work happened outside the barn. Avery insisted I stay in the spare room in the house, a small, clean space that smelled of cedar and lavender. She said the drive back and forth to town was a waste of daylight. I knew it was more than that. It was a test or an invitation. We fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun. I'd be up at dawn, the smell of coffee already filling the house. We'd drink it on the porch, watching the sky turn from bruised purple to pale gold, not speaking much. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was a space where things could settle. After coffee, I'd head to the barn, and she'd head out on her horse to check the fences or the cattle. But she always found her way back to the barn by midday, sometimes with a canteen of cold water, sometimes just to stand and watch. She'd ask questions about the engine, her brow furrowed in concentration as I explained the function of a gasket or the purpose of a timing belt. She learned quickly, her hands, so used to the reins of a horse, proving surprisingly deft with a socket wrench. We were rebuilding the tractor together, piece by piece. In the evenings, we'd eat dinner in the quiet kitchen. Simple food, stew, cornbread, whatever she'd thrown in the slow cooker that morning. It was during these meals that the pieces of her story began to emerge, offered up like carefully chosen parts from a toolbox. She told me about her husband, David, who had died 2 years prior in a rollover accident. In the very tractor I was now trying to bring back to life. She spoke of him with a kind of weary reverence, a man who loved the land but was always fighting it. She told me about the debt, the predatory lenders, the neighbors who watched and waited for her to fail, to sell off the land her grandparents had homesteaded. She wasn't just fixing a tractor, she was fighting for her history, for her home. I found myself talking, too, the words spilling out of me in the warm, dim light of the kitchen. I told her about Sarah, about the garage I'd poured my life savings into, about the crushing shame of watching it all fall apart. I had come here to fix a machine because it was easier than facing the fact that I didn't know how to fix myself. The days bled into one another, a blur of grease, sweat, and shared silences. The line between employer and employee, between stranger and confidant, grew thinner until it disappeared entirely. I started to notice the small things. The way she tucked a stray braid behind her ear when she was thinking hard. The deep lines around her eyes that softened when she laughed. A rare, rumbling sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did me. One afternoon, I was struggling to loosen a rusted bolt deep in the engine housing. My knuckles were raw, and I was cursing under my breath. Avery came and stood beside me, watching for a moment. Then, without a word, she reached past me, her arm brushing mine. Her hand, strong and sure, closed over the wrench with mine. The warmth of her skin through my thin shirt was like a jolt of electricity. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I could smell the faint scent of leather and sun on her skin. Together, we put our weight into it. The bolt groaned, resisted, and then, with a sharp crack, gave way. Our heads were bent close together, our bodies aligned in a single, focused effort. When the bolt came free, we didn't pull away immediately. We stayed there for a beat too long, the shared victory hanging in the air between us. I looked up and found her already looking at me, her dark eyes unreadable but intense. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a dangerous feeling, this pull, this sudden, terrifying awareness of her as more than just a client, more than just a friend. It was a complication I couldn't afford, a gear that didn't belong in the simple machine of my life. I pulled my hand back, the metal of the wrench suddenly cold against my skin. "Thanks," I mumbled, my voice tight. She just nodded, her expression shuddered again, and stepped back, putting the space back between us. But the space wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, humming with the ghost of that touch, with the unspoken thing that had passed between us. The air in the barn felt thick, and for the first time, the work felt like a cage, not a refuge. The storm came on the 5th day. It had been threatening all afternoon, the sky turning a bruised, moody gray and the air growing heavy and thick with the smell of rain. I was trying to finish rewiring the ignition before it broke, my fingers fumbling with the colored wires as the wind began to howl around the corners of the barn. Avery was securing the livestock, her movements efficient and urgent. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, spattering against the tin roof like thrown stones. Then the sky opened up. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge, a solid sheet of water that blurred the world into a gray smear. A crack of thunder shook the very foundations of the barn, and then the lights flickered and died, plunging us into a sudden, profound darkness. My breath hitched. The only light was the weak beam from my headlamp, cutting a nervous circle in the gloom. "Lena." Avery's voice came from the barn door, closer than I expected. "You all right?" Her flashlight beam found mine, a reassuring connection in the roaring dark. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. Just the power, the rain was deafening now, a constant, violent roar on the roof. "We're not getting it back tonight," she said, her tone grim. "The lines go down if a bird sneezes on them out here. Come on." "Nothing more you can do tonight." I gathered my tools by feel, my hands clumsy in the dark. We ran through the downpour to the house, arriving on the porch soaked and breathless. Inside, the house was even darker, filled with the sound of the storm. It felt smaller, more intimate without the electric hum of the refrigerator or the glow of a television screen. Avery lit a few kerosene lamps, their soft, golden light pushing back the shadows and casting flickering patterns on the walls. The world shrank to the size of that small, warm room. She handed me a towel, and our fingers brushed. This time, neither of us pulled away. The casual, accidental touches of the past few days had been replaced by a new, deliberate awareness. The storm outside was a mirror of the one raging inside me, a chaotic mix of fear and desire. We were trapped, the two of us, in this small arc of a house, and the professional distance I had tried so hard to maintain had been washed away by the rain. We sat at the kitchen table, the lantern between us painting our faces in gold and shadow. The storm raged on, a wild, elemental force that made the house feel both fragile and incredibly safe. Avery had poured us both a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid glowing in the lamplight. For a long time, we just sat and listened to the rain, the silence between us no longer comfortable, but fraught with a heavy, unspoken tension. I watched her hands wrapped around her glass, the strength in her fingers, the map of scars and calluses that told the story of her life. I wanted, with a sudden, aching clarity, to trace those lines with my own fingers. "David hated storms," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the wind. "He said they reminded him that the land was always in charge. That we were just borrowing it. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. He built this place with his own hands," she continued, her eyes distant. "Every fence post, every rafter in that barn. After he died, I kept trying to hold it all together, to be as strong as he was. But I'm not him. The whole place is falling apart, and I'm just patching holes. The tractor, the fences, the roof. It's all just patching holes." She finally looked at me, and in the flickering light, I saw the glint of tears in her eyes. The mask of the stoic, unbreakable rancher was gone. In its place was just a woman, exhausted and alone. "When you showed up," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I thought you were just another patch. Another temporary fix. But then you started asking questions. You started listening. You didn't just look at the engine. You looked at the whole damn thing." My own throat felt tight. "You told me to," I whispered. You said, "Start with me." A single tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. I was so tired of being strong, Lena. I just wanted someone to see that I was breaking. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, the power dynamics, the unspoken rules, the fears that had kept us apart, they all dissolved into nothing. There was only the truth, raw and undeniable, hanging in the warm air between us. I reached across the table and my hand covered hers. Her skin was warm, her fingers strong as they curled around my own. It wasn't a tentative touch, it was an anchor. I saw in her eyes the same aching loneliness I had carried for months, the same desperate need to be seen, truly seen, by another person. I stood up and walked around the table until I was standing behind her chair. I placed my hands on her shoulders, feeling the tension coiled there like a spring. She leaned her head back, her braids brushing against my stomach, and looked up at me. Her face, tilted up in the lamplight, was the most beautiful, vulnerable thing I had ever seen. I bent down, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, to stop me. She didn't. She closed her eyes, a silent surrender. When my lips met hers, it wasn't a fiery, desperate kiss. It was soft, hesitant, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of whiskey and rain and salt. It was a kiss that spoke of shared grief and the tentative, fragile hope of something new. We weren't fixing each other. We were simply two broken people holding the pieces together, finding solace in the shared, quiet work of it. The storm could rage all it wanted. In that small kitchen, in that circle of lamplight, we had found a pocket of stillness, a place to finally breathe. The morning after the storm was unnaturally bright and clean. The air smelled of wet earth and sage, and the sky was a freshly washed blue. The world felt new. We woke up tangled together in her bed, the morning light streaming through the window. There was an awkwardness, a shyness that hadn't been there in the darkness, but it was overlaid with a deep, quiet tenderness. We made coffee in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, filled with the memory of the night and the promise of the day. After breakfast, I went out to the barn. The air inside was cool and damp. I looked at the tractor, at the half-finished wiring and the disassembled parts laid out on the tarp. It was still a broken machine, but it didn't feel like a monument to failure anymore. It felt like a promise. Avery came in a little while later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me, her fingers brushing mine. "Thought you might need this," she said, a small, genuine smile on her face. It transformed her, chasing the shadows from her eyes. "Thanks," I said, my own smile feeling unfamiliar on my lips. I took a sip of the hot, strong coffee and then turned back to the engine. "I think I can get her running today." We worked side by side all morning, a seamless team. We didn't talk much about the night before. We didn't need to. It was there in every shared glance, in the easy way our bodies moved around each other in the tight space, in the gentle patience we showed with the stubborn, greasy parts of the old machine. There was a rhythm to our work, a shared purpose that went beyond the mechanics. We were building something. By late afternoon, it was done. Every wire was connected, every hose was clamped, every part was cleaned and oiled and returned to its rightful place. I wiped my hands on a rag, my heart pounding with a nervous anticipation that was about more than just the tractor. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet. "This is it." Avery stood back, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mixture of hope and skepticism. I climbed into the driver's seat. The vinyl was cracked, but it felt like a throne. I took a deep breath, turned the key, and held it. The engine sputtered once, twice, a pathetic cough. My stomach dropped. I tried again. Nothing but a discouraging click. I could feel Avery's disappointment like a physical weight. "Wait," she said. She came and stood on the running board, leaning in close. "You're flooding it. David always said you have to sweet-talk it a little." She reached past me, her hand covering mine on the key. "Try it now." Gently, I turned the key again, her hand guiding mine. The engine caught, coughed, and then, with a deafening, beautiful roar, it bellowed to life. The whole barn vibrated with the power of it. A cloud of black smoke billowed out before settling into a steady, rhythmic chug. It was running. It was alive. I looked at Avery, and she was grinning, a wide, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. She let out a whoop of pure joy, and without thinking, I leaned over and kissed her hard, tasting diesel fumes and triumph. It was a different kiss from the night before, not tender and questioning, but solid and sure. It was the kiss of people who had built something together, who had taken something broken and made it whole again. We let the engine run for a while, the sound of it a victory anthem in the quiet afternoon. I finally shut it off, and the resulting silence was deep and peaceful. I slid out of the driver's seat and stood facing her in the middle of the barn. The job was done. My truck was packed. There was nothing, technically, keeping me here. The thought of leaving felt like a physical blow, like a part being ripped out of my own engine. So I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. "I'll send you the bill." Avery's smile faded. She looked at the tractor, then back at me. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice low. "You fix it and you leave?" I shrugged, unable to meet her eyes. "That's the job. I thought the job was different," she said, taking a step closer. "I thought we were fixing more than just a tractor." She was right. We had been. But what came next? What was the manual for this? There were no diagrams, no instructions for how to piece a life together with someone else. "Avery," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. "The spare room is empty," she said, cutting me off. "And the roof on the west side of the barn needs patching. The pay is terrible, but the coffee is good." She looked at me, her eyes steady and serious, laying all her cards on the table. "I can't do it alone anymore, Lena. I don't want to." It wasn't a declaration of love, not in the way the movies tell it. It was something better. It was an offer of partnership, an invitation to stay and continue the slow, difficult work of rebuilding. It was a promise that we would face the broken things together. I looked around the barn, at the resurrected tractor, at the tools laid out on the tarp, at the woman standing in front of me, offering me a home when I didn't even know I was looking for one. Leaving had been my default setting for so long, running from one broken thing to the next. For the first time, I felt the pull to stay, to put down roots in this tired, beautiful place. To build something that would last. "Okay," I said, and the word felt like the most important one I had ever spoken. "Okay, let's take a look at that roof."